Over the years, capture cards have been getting progressively cheaper, but if you're watching this video, you're probably wondering, can a $30 card hold up to a $160 card? Well, for some reason, Elgato decided to send me a 4KS, and today I'm going to be taking a look at that and see what I've been missing. And the results are a little bit interesting. But we got to get some specs out of the way before we get into the meat of it. Both the cheap capture card and the Elgato can give you pass-through up to 4K 60 FPS. What this means is you'll be playing your games through your console on your TV in about the highest quality possible while still capturing your gameplay. But that's about where the similarities end. The cheap capture card claims to record up to 1080p 60 FPS, while the Elgato records up to 4K 60 FPS. And let me just go ahead and clarify this really quick, because you're probably wondering, what cheap capture card are you talking about? If you go to Amazon, you're going to see these things plastered from a million different sellers without the anime sticker on it, and they're all essentially the exact same thing with the exact same layout. They range anywhere from 20 to 40 bucks, so they're relatively inexpensive, and despite the fact that they're going to mislead you with 4K on the front of it, it's not actually 4K. It only gives you pass-through to 4K so you can play in 4K, but you'll only be recording it 1080p. But if you're somebody who plays at a higher refresh rate, say past 120, 140 FPS, this will actually support variable refresh rate, which I don't believe the cheap ones will. The Elgato can also supposedly capture HDR gameplay with their tone mapping function that I guess doesn't work on Mac, so I couldn't try that out. And I don't have a display good enough to support HDR anyways. So I've collected a handful of gameplay samples from various consoles, and to just go ahead and put this out there right off of the bat, I was having an issue connecting these different capture cards back and forth, particularly when I went between this one and the Elgato. It wouldn't let me go all the way up to 4K, but as you'll see in the comparisons, that doesn't really matter too much. But let's get into our first one here, EA Skate. So in Skate, I was capturing in 4K for the Elgato. I don't know if Skate actually runs in native 4K on the Xbox Series X, and I'm just going to show you a little sample from the gameplay back and forth and let you make your own judgment before I point anything out. As we move over to some Metal Gear Solid Delta samples that I took, we'll talk about some of the differences that I noticed. Due to those issues I previously mentioned, I believe that there's a good chance I was getting a 1080p output on both samples I was recording, but despite this, you may notice that the capture does look quite a bit different. So the first thing I noticed when capturing samples from both cards is that the colors on the Elgato seem to be a little more accurate, while the colors on the cheap capture card are a little more saturated. I also noticed in Metal Gear Solid specifically, the game seemed to have a little bit more of a greenish tint to it on the cheap capture card, and that's not apparent on the Elgato. And that's not because I was running with any color filters, this is just the base standard gameplay and quality mode. But to talk about the visuals even further, I'm going to bring up a sample that I recorded as a little bit of an oddball edition with the Switch version of Cyberpunk. Switch 2 version, I guess. I'm going to use Digital Foundry as a reference point here because they know a lot more about this than I do. Cyberpunk 2 on the Switch 2 should ideally top out at 1080p in quality mode. So you would think that if you're recording at a max of 1080p on both of these capture cards, they should look nearly identical. Despite this, I noticed some differences right away. UI elements and text in particular is noticeably sharper on the Elgato, and this goes for pretty much every game I've tested up to this point. In a vacuum and with YouTube compression, you probably wouldn't notice too much of a difference. Hell, I've been using the cheap capture card for years and I've never once had somebody say, you know, that 1080p gameplay doesn't look like it's quite 1080p. I'd say for 20 or 30 bucks, it does a good enough job, but when you actually stack it up against the Elgato, you'll notice that the Elgato is noticeably sharper. So, case closed, right? Obviously, the more expensive capture card is going to give you sharper gameplay when it records up to 4K, right? Well, what if you just want to record some retro gameplay? Well, if we check out this Burnout 3 gameplay that I captured from this PS2 I recently just picked up, it's actually a little bit of a different story. At first, I really wanted to believe that the Elgato looked sharper here and that it was case closed issue of this just not supplying the resolution it's supposed to. But when I feed that crusty PS2 video through my component cables to an HDMI adapter and send it through the capture cards, they look really similar. Like, I'm splitting hairs here to see a difference. Yes, we do still have the color tone issue where things look a little bit more saturated on the cheap capture card, but it still doesn't look that bad, right? Well, in my opinion, it doesn't look that bad, but you can be the judge of that. When it comes down to the capture quality of these cards, I was genuinely a little bit surprised. Even in instances where we're only capturing 1080p gameplay on both cards, there's still a noticeably sharper image from the Elgato. But it's not just image quality that you have to consider here. Given that these are cheap cards, long-term reliability is probably going to be an issue. For instance, this is the second card in this form factor that I've went through in the past 5 years or so. And while this one was supposed to also capture 1080p 60 FPS gameplay, anytime I try to capture 1080p gameplay, it only records 30 FPS. And then there's the audio syncing issues. In both gameplay samples that I recorded with the Elgato and the cheap capture card, the audio and video were synced perfectly, but every time I record for hours on end, which I do a lot on the cheap capture card, the audio eventually becomes unsynced with the video. I probably recorded over 100 hours of gameplay so far on the Elgato, and never once have I had the audio come unsynced with the video. Now, this is a minor annoyance for video editing. You can just adjust it in post and it's not that big of a deal, but I imagine this would be a bigger issue in streaming. I imagine that if you're 3 hours into a stream, you don't want your gameplay getting unsynced with the audio. And again, that goes back to the long-term reliability of these things. Like I said, this is the second card that I went through because the first one I had would randomly freeze up for some reason. That being said, I did have a similar issue of the video quality randomly freezing up on the Elgato. It turns out in this specific instance, it was a monitor setting where I had to turn on HDMI compatibility. All that is to say, these aren't quite as plug and play as you might expect. There's going to be a little troubleshooting you're gonna have to do regardless of what capture card you pick up. You're gonna have to mess with the settings a little bit. But I guess at the end of the day, I can't really complain too much about these having reliability issues when they're so damn cheap. Again, we're talking 30 bucks to pick one of these up, and if you're just getting started, that's not really bad. That being said, this isn't a bad deal either. For $160, you're getting a capture card that can give you 4K 60 pass-through, 4K 60 capture, HDR capture, variable refresh rate capture, and it's all in a card that gives you a nice convenient USB-C output. It works with Mac and Windows flawlessly when you plug it straight up to OBS. Okay, well, I wouldn't say flawlessly, so you're gonna have to tinker with some settings to dial it in right, but that's not really a big deal. The Elgato's actually a very good value if you just want a solid future-proof capture card that you're gonna be able to use for a long time, assuming that this does hold up for years to come. I want to remind you guys that this is what I started out on. This is the Hapag HD PVR2 Gaming Edition that I believe retailed at $150. And you know what you got for that $150? 1080p 30 FPS output. And if you wanted to record on PS3, you had to hook up a set of component cables through a proprietary adapter. And this was my second unit after the first one died on me. Yeah, man, capturing gameplay was different back in the day. Now the worst case scenario is you pick up a $30 card on Amazon, and if it doesn't work, you just return it. Where the best case scenario is you just fork over 160 bucks and get you a card you don't really got to worry about, and it's gonna probably work reliably every time. I've went through numerous cards, through the cheap ones, through the cheap branded ones like the EVGA XR1. This thing stopped working on me, and ultimately if I had realized that this one was giving a better picture quality even at 1080p, I probably would have considered it a lot sooner. So to round this whole video together, I would say, special announcement:
like and subscribe for more trash.
If you're just starting out and you want to get a cheap option to get your foot in the door and see how you like it, you can't really go wrong with these things. But considering how cheap they are and how many different manufacturers and sellers are making these things, you can bet that quality control and reliability is likely going to be an issue. So if you have the extra money to fork over and you just want something reliable that's gonna work, the Elgato is pretty good, man. Overall, I'm very happy and impressed with this card. Thanks to Elgato for sending it out, and if you guys want to get one for yourself, I'll leave an Amazon affiliate link in the description. Otherwise, this is kind of an offshoot video. I don't really plan on making tech reviews or any more capture card reviews, but if it's something you want to see, let me know in the comments. And just in case you're curious to know how these actually perform in the real world, anything from my Fast and the Furious videos beyond is recorded on the Elgato, and anything before that is going to be on this cheap capture card. And I've also done some cheap capture card videos. There's a whole backlog of stuff, man. Go watch my videos. I'll see you later. I'm yapping. I gotta stop yapping so much, dude.